Hello and welcome to Arizona State University and the Center for Services Leadership. Today we are holding a webinar in our series, A Conversation With, and our very first guest on this new series is someone that many of you have known for a long time, and I couldn't be happier than inviting Mary Jo Bitner to be the first guest in this new series. I'm going to just introduce her very briefly, and then we'll talk a lot about many of the things that Mary Jo has done in her career. Mary Jo is a PhD, Professor Emeritus now at Arizona State University in the W.P. Carey School of Business, Executive Director Emeritus in the Center for Services Leadership, one of the founders of the services field in the Academy, and just a really wonderful human being. And I'm really excited about having Mary Jo on as a guest in our A Conversation With series. Mary Jo, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Thomas. It's great to be here. Really excited to talk to a group of people I know out there, and also just to have a conversation with you, Thomas. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. A couple of technical notes. We will, throughout the webinar, have opportunities for you to ask questions. In order to do that, what you will need to do is go to the chat function. So if you are on your PC right now and have Zoom up, if you wiggle your mouse, you will see in the bottom a series of options there. One of them is chat. If you click on chat, you can send a note to Crystal Host. Crystal, many of you know Crystal, of course, very well, a very integral member of our team here at the center. And Crystal is sitting just across from us over there watching the feed and seeing if you have any questions. So please send a chat note to Crystal Host if you have any questions, and I will make space for that as we move along. Secondly, if you are joining us on your phone, then this will work wonderfully for hearing us, but unfortunately you won't be able to send us questions through that manner. So if you are on your phone, if you can also simultaneously log in with your PC, then you can send questions that way. We are also recording, so if at any point you have technical problems on your end, you can jump back on, and whatever you've missed will be available, of course, in the recording as well. So that's it for technical notes, and I'm going to jump right in and take us into a little bit of a time machine to when Mary Jo started, and just before she started, in fact, in the late 1970s. And at that point, I'm just curious to see, what was it like to think about services? What did we know about services in the academy or in business? And what was it like to think about, hey, I might do something in services? Mary Jo.
Well, I think, and probably there are a number of you on the call or on the webinar that also were there in the late 70s and 80s, as I was. It was an exciting time to be involved in services, but the knowledge base that we all had to start with was pretty slim. We were, kind of like pioneers, as they've called many of us. The knowledge base was slim. There were a few books. There were some books that had come out in the 60s. There were some articles, notably Lynn Shostak's article in the JM in 1977, Breaking Free from Product Marketing. But there wasn't a lot out there in the literature and in the journals. And in our 1993 paper that Steve Brown and Ray Fisk and I wrote together in Journal of Retailing, we referred to this period in the 1970s, pre-80s, as the crawling out period. There wasn't a lot, and people were vigorously defending why we should have services marketing and why services marketing was different. So that was a lot of what was going on at the time, and that was exactly when I got started in the early 1980s. The 1970s paved the way, I think, for a much more vigorous group of scholars and businesses working together. And we gave up on the debate about, is services different? We gave up on that in the early 80s, I think, just to say, hey, well, let's go work on the problems and let's not worry about how different it is from products or goods. And early on, I think in that time frame also, the characteristics of the field started to take shape. And we started to be able to see and crystallize this idea that, yeah, this is really an important area. It's very interdisciplinary. We can't do this in one discipline alone. We have to bring in different ideas. It's very global. We had people all over the world that were starting to be interested in services, marketing and services. So it was an exciting time, a really vigorous time, and a fun time to be involved. in industry, you asked me to talk a little bit about industry at that time. The knowledge base around managing services was also very slim. The business community, of course, we all know that giving good service has been a business mantra since the day business started. I mean, people have always known they should provide good service. However, in the 1970s and 80s, businesses started to say, wait a minute, we need more tools, we need models, we need knowledge, we need cases, we need to really understand what that means in much greater depth. And so they came to the academic community and said to us, you guys, we took MBA programs and we learned a lot, but we didn't learn much about services. And we want you to now study services, to help us build models, to help us build frameworks and manage service businesses. So again, very exciting time, because on both sides, the business world and the academic world, we're all kind of thinking and getting excited at the same time.
Yeah, you mentioned Lynn Shostak and her article, Breaking Free from Product Marketing and Journal of Marketing. And that article was really interesting when I always think back to it, because Lynn was a practitioner at the time, right? So she was not an academic. She was publishing in one of the premier journals for the academy, and basically saying what you just laid out as far as this stuff isn't working.
Right.
Who knows something that's working, and kind of reaching out to the academy. And that's actually, we'll talk about the center in a few minutes as well, but that's actually one of the key things about the center, that we're trying to bring those two groups together, and that's really how the field started right at the beginning, with Lynn Shostak, a practitioner, saying this isn't working, what you had.
Right.
So that's great. Now, so that's sort of the stage for where you enter and where the field starts. Then, of course, you could have done a lot of different things and would have been wildly successful at all of them, I know. So how did you decide to go into the academy, become a professor, get a PhD? How did that come about?
Well, that's an interesting story, and I think anyone out there who's an academic, and probably anyone in business practice, knows that your career takes shape over time, and probably most of us, our career paths had an interesting, is not a straight path in any case. In my case, I was working in the university. I worked at Stanford University and at University of Washington on the staff. And I was working in university jobs and thinking, I really would like to continue to move in this direction, in the management and running of universities. And I said, well, let me go get a master's. So I got an MBA at that time, thinking I wanted to either go into university management or nonprofit management. I wasn't interested at that time in the typical kind of MBA jobs. And in fact, my faculty noticed that, and they told me that, and they said, hey, maybe you'd be interested in doing a PhD. You seem like someone who might be interested in doing that. So that was part of what moved me in that direction. I also, on a practical level, I graduated at a very bad time. And from my MBA program, I graduated in the 1970s, late 1970s. Job market was awful. It was just awful for MBAs. And I didn't want to do those kinds of jobs anyway. So I had the opportunity to work as a research assistant with Professor Bernie Booms. Many of you know his name on many of my earlier articles. He was a faculty member and a professor of hotel management at Washington State University in Seattle, and I joined him as a research assistant. And he had done a visiting faculty position at Harvard, worked with some of the service folks at Harvard, and many of us still know their names and remember them from back then. He had gotten involved with them. He'd also discovered Christian Gronros and his work in Europe, in Finland. And so he was starting to say, hey, maybe some of this service management work that he was learning about could have a lot of applicability in the hotel management place where he was. I was interested in nonprofit, and I got interested in service very quickly as a broader way of thinking about nonprofit. At the time, I also took up teaching. I was teaching in the community college system, teaching marketing. And I looked around at myself and I said, I'm writing articles, I'm publishing conference papers, I'm teaching in the community college. I love all this stuff. Maybe I should get a PhD and make it more formal. So that was kind of my strange path to the academy, but I got there, and I started, doing my PhD at the University of Washington and working deeply into services then, and that's the beginning of the story. That's how I started.
Well, I'm glad, and I know the academy, the field is better for it, that your strange path led you to where you are. And you mentioned Christian Groners. Another one of the interesting things about the field is that it right from the start was so very international, with groups in Scandinavia and France and all over, and so that was really one of the interesting things about this particular field and how it came about. So that's really amazing. Now, right at that start, you came up with something that every services marketing student learns right off the top, and even if you're not in services marketing, you learn it, the 7P model. So we used to have the 4 Ps in marketing, just the traditional 4 Ps: product, price, place, and promotion. This is how we think about what we do, the tactics around marketing. And I guess you noticed something was missing. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about how did this 7P model, how did that come up and how did it get started?
Well, the 7P model was something really early on, and I mean early on. Bernie Booms and I worked on that before I even started doing a PhD. So this was before I applied or got into the PhD program. We developed this. I was then working, as I said earlier, as a research assistant in the hotel school at Washington State University in Seattle. And we were studying marketing models and frameworks, and again, looking at Christian's work and Everett's work out of Scandinavia, and we were inspired, I think, to expand the 4 Ps model because we looked at the factors that really influence customers and help to determine customer satisfaction in services. And we said, it seems like it's more than the 4 Ps. And we looked at people issues like employees. Believe it or not, people at that time were not looking at employees as really part of marketing. Other than sales people, of course. So we looked at people, the employees, the customers themselves and their role in service, and other customers and how they influence the service experience. We thought about physical evidence, the physical pieces and the physical environment. And that was another piece. So participants, people, physical evidence, the second P, and then finally the last of the 7 Ps was process. And nowadays we look at that kind of as the experience and all of the things that happen along the way for the customer and how that becomes part of the satisfaction process as well. So those were the 7 Ps, and that's how we came up with that model. We proposed the model. We published it in a conference proceedings where I met many of the people who may be on the phone, met people like Ray Fisk and Steve Brown and Valerie Zeithamel and Len Berry and all of the Christian Gronos, people who were at that conference. We proposed and published that paper there. I got to tell you something that maybe not a lot of people know. We also prepared a manuscript around the 7 Ps and that whole idea, and we submitted it to Journal of Marketing. And I still have the letter that we got back from Jerry Wind when he was the editor of JM at that time, and we submitted it. And it really was, honestly, a request for revision. But Bernie and I didn't recognize that. I wasn't even a PhD student yet, and I didn't know what a letter looked like. And that certainly, and I know now, those requests for revisions usually look like a rejection.
Right.
And we thought it was a rejection. Bernie was an economist, so it wasn't like the kind of letters he was used to getting back from journals. So we said, oh well, and we put it in a drawer and we put it away. And that's the story of the 7 Ps and how they got started and how they died in a drawer.
Well, thankfully for not just the academy, but also for business practice, it came out of the drawer and made it into every textbook and every discussion of services. So, we're thankful for that, and certainly a really helpful way of thinking through on a very fundamental level what services are all about. Not just from marketing perspective, but as you said, interdisciplinarily,
right. Just
thinking through a little bit as to what you need to figure out, and so and all of that before even starting the PhD program. So we've all got a lot of work to do before we even get half of that anywhere. Even
well,
after many
years. It also was a foundation for me for the research I then did on employees, on physical environment, on process with blueprinting and all. So it formed for me a really important piece of the beginning of my career.
That's it. Well, we'll come back to some of those topics as well. Just a reminder at this point, if you would like to send in questions, the way to do that is to wiggle your mouse, and then you have in the bottom of the Zoom an option for chat. If you click on that, please send a note to Crystal Co-host, and at that point it'll get to us, and we'll get to your questions later then as well. So, but let me go now forward a few years from when you came up with the 7P model. So you finished then, after you had decided you wanted to go there, you finished the PhD and you joined ASU in 1987. Tell me about the services group here. So you're of course joining, and you have all these wonderful ideas about services. And those of you in the academy, and even those of you in the business world, you know that your first job or even your later jobs might not always align exactly with the things you were thinking you would do, but in this case they did. So tell me about the folks that were here at ASU in terms of thinking about services, and at the time then fledgling really Center for Services Leadership. Tell me about that a little bit.
Sure, happy to do that. It's an interesting story, and part of it's a story I learned after I joined. Apparently, a few years before I joined, the marketing department at ASU, the whole department, all of the faculty together made a big decision. And that decision was to start a Center for Services, Center for Services Marketing, it was determined at that time. And it was a really conscious decision on the part of the whole department, not just of one or two people. And they decided they wanted a center. They thought we need something to distinguish our department. Should it be a center for sales? Should it be a center for service? Should it be for healthcare? What should it be? And they were looking at what the faculty strengths were at the time. Based on the interests of the faculty at the time, it was decided to make that a center for services. And that was, again, as I said, a consensus decision, a conscious decision. Lots of discussion went into that, as I learned later. The key players at that time in making that decision were Steve Brown, who many of you know well, Larry Crosby, who many of you also know, who was on the faculty here at that time.
And he was just in our symposium a few months ago.
Yes, he just spoke at the symposium last fall, and he's going to join us again this summer on the quiz program. Michael Mokwa was very involved at that time as well in services and nonprofit primarily. Mike Hutt, Bruce Walker was the department chair at that time. They were some of the key players around services. However, like I said, this was a decision made by the whole faculty. Quickly after they made that decision and started to look at how they were going to organize and build a center, they started to recruit, because they wanted to bring in someone or someones with a real interest in services. And I had met some of the folks at different conferences already, Steve and Larry among them. And I was one of the first faculty members recruited specifically with an interest in service, and which was incredibly fortunate for me, and also I think really fun for the department to hire someone specifically for the decision to focus on service. The first Service Leadership Institute was offered a month after I joined. So in February of 1987, I think it was February, it might have been January. Somebody will correct me, I'm sure.
We're still doing that now. We're doing it twice a year now. The
Exactly.
Service Leadership Institute, twice a year. The next one in mid-September coming up.
Right.
And so you were right there when it started. Yeah.
And I was joined and I spoke at the very first one that year. Michael Mokwa was leading the institute at that time, along with Steve and Larry, but he was kind of in charge of the institute. And I was on the program of the Service Leadership Institute and now Strategic Service Institute every year of my career until I retired, 4 months ago. So it's been something's been really important to me, and also really important to the center. Many faculty over those 30 years have really engaged with the center, faculty across disciplines, companies, a wide range of companies. We have grown from just having kind of pure service businesses involved with us to now having all kinds of businesses, from manufacturing to high tech to distribution companies, all seeing service as a really important part of what they do. Faculty around the world. We have a now 85-member faculty network of faculty across disciplines around the world. So the center, from that fledgling beginning, I like that word that you use, fledgling beginning, has really grown and developed, and has been an exciting place. But that's a little bit of the history.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and I'm glad I found the center when I did some 20 years ago, and that it had already at that time become much more than fledgling a full-grown bird for sure, flying and soaring through the skies of the service field. But let's go to a question from the audience now, and for that I'm going to turn the mic over to Crystal, and Crystal is going to read the question. Crystal, please go ahead.
Well, hello everyone. We have a guest who has a question for Mary Jo, and this person is wondering, who was the service researcher who most influenced you in your career?
Oh my goodness.
Long list.
That is a very hard one to put one person's name on. So I won't do that because I can't. But there were so many in the early days, and I'm going to mention many of their names, I think, this morning. In the early days, Christian Granros and Everett Gumason from the Nordic school, as it became known, really were influential in my thinking. Bernie Booms, of course, who was my key mentor at the very beginning. Steve Brown, Ray Fisk, Valerie Zeitam, I'll talk about a little bit later. So many that I can't even possibly put a pinpoint on it. But it's a great list and a growing list still today.
That's great, and keep the questions coming. Where we're moving on right now with the next part that not only as far as your career, but also the field that moved us forward, and that is the service Scape model. And so in the academy, a very well-known model, service Scape for the industry folks on the line today. Also a model you've seen certainly when you've come to our programs, so the landscape or the place where the service takes place. That's how I try to explain it to my students. And that's a very important and influential model as well in the service field. Can you tell us a little bit about how did that come about and why did that develop?
Yeah, well, that was, again, something, and this is probably a really good story. I like to tell stories. A good story for young faculty and PhD students to hear. The ServiceScape model is really looking at how the physical space of where a service is delivered and offered influences both the customers and employees in that experience of delivering the service and how to manage that effectively. The ServiceScape model, why I think this is important for young faculty and PhD students to hear, developed out of an independent study class that I took as a PhD student. So we had proposed the 7 Ps, as we've already talked about a while before that, and one of the new Ps was physical evidence, including the physical environment. And I thought, if I'm going to say this is important, I better become an expert on physical environment and environmental psychology so I can understand why the physical environment influences people and how it might fit with marketing and the 7 Ps more in depth. So I did an independent study with a psychology professor who was an expert in environmental psychology, and he guided me to books and articles. He'd written some. I read a lot of stuff, and I tried to integrate it and synthesize the literature and bring it into our space. And one of the key things I did was bring the customer and employee simultaneously into the model. Now, of course, that was in my PhD program when I did the independent study. And I had to put it on the back burner because I had a dissertation to do. I did my dissertation, I came out, I got to ASU, got the dissertation paper under review, and then I said, okay, now I can pull back out that environmental psychology stuff. I really was so interested in it and I loved it, and so let's see what I can do with that. And I developed the model at that time around my understanding of services and my knowledge of environmental psychology then. I submitted it, and this is not to be recommended for young faculty and PhD students, especially today. I submitted it as a sole author to JM, just hey. And it was a long review process, needless to say. That's almost always true with conceptual papers, I've found. The review process was long. During it, I relied heavily on Mike Hutt, who was also one of my big mentors, an important mentor of mine at ASU. And he actually was the one who came up with the ServiceScape word and title. So Mike Hutt gets full credit for the ServiceScape title, which is now used. It's just like a word that seems to be used lots of places, doesn't even get attached to me necessarily. It's just a word people use. And he gets full credit for that title because he told me the title you have for this paper is boring. He said, it's boring. So let's think of a better title. And he said, how about Scape? And I said, I like that. And he said, okay. And then the next day he came back into my office, really the next day, and he said, oh, no. Scape, too risky to put that into the JM. And I said, no, I really like it. And so I went ahead and put it in, and the rest is history on that paper. That paper probably has had more impact as a single paper of any paper I've written. Not that I continued working in that area, which I didn't very much, a little bit. But the paper itself in that model has probably had more influence, I think, from what I can tell from the emails I get and things.
And
any other.
also highly cited outside of the marketing discipline,
Yes.
and in the design schools and other
Right.
areas, very
Right.
much cited. And something that I always found off what we talk about in services, probably one of the areas I find that businesses are often the weakest on understanding the service scape and really driving that notion of that the physical environment, whether you have a location where people come or you have a field service that goes out and in just designing that space and designing the experience and designing the interactions, all of those physical evidence pieces are often, I find, the least as far as getting the attention of management, and probably the easiest, lowest hanging fruit to try and make improvements.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's come into focus again, as I mentioned a little while ago, with the whole focus on experience. I think a lot of people are now thinking more about the physical aspects of experience. So it's coming into people's attention more and more all the time.
And we notice right away when it works and when it doesn't.
Yeah.
So if you go to a place like a Disney World, everybody sees and understands the impact that a
Right.
well-designed and a really crafted environment has on the service experience. If you compare that to the experience at, say, Six Flags or anywhere else, really, even in that same industry, how much of a difference it makes. And then we seem to forget it once we step out of the Disney World. We seem to forget, or people seem to forget how much that impacts them.
Right.
So let's get to another audience question. And again, as a reminder, if you wiggle your mouse, there's a chat option, and you send the question to Crystal Host. Crystal, please go ahead with the next question.
Sterling Bone would like you to share with us your thoughts on teaching services in the classroom. What are some of the highlights of sharing this knowledge with undergraduate and graduate students?
Well, that's a great question, because of course I taught services marketing from day one. Pretty much since 1988, I taught MBA students. Started teaching PhD students services in 2006, and interestingly, I have not taught undergraduates services marketing. But all that said, the most fun thing about teaching services, I think, and many of us have talked about this, probably I've talked with Sterling about this as well, is the students' reaction. They are very excited to learn about services and to see that it's a field that actually has some depth to it and has some tools and techniques. Many of them have worked in service industries. In fact, I would say all of them, by the time they take our courses, have worked in service industries. They have their own experiences to draw from. It's a really fun class to teach. It's also one where I find students walk away and say, they really learned a lot, and they're planning to use what they learned. So the way we teach services, and all of us, not just myself, I think we teach it from a more of an applied basis and a problem-focused basis, how do you make things better for people? How do you think? And so students love that, and they take that away and they try it, and they use it. They use our tools. They use the textbooks. They really, I think, get a lot out of it. And it's not all about us. It's about really how they put themselves into it and see the applicability of what we're teaching. Another really interesting little observation that I've had and I've shared with others is that we find when we teach services, a lot of the approach we teach and the way of thinking that we teach comes into play in the classroom. Mm-hmm. So when you're teaching services, oftentimes you see the students start treating each other in a service-oriented way and with service-oriented kind of behaviors. I love that. I love seeing that. And the students will remark on that as well. They say, wow, in this class we do this and we do that. So it's a great thing to teach. I hope all of you out there that have taught it share that feeling. I know Thomas probably does, because I know you've taught it a lot.
I have taught it a few times, also to undergraduates who have the same reaction and really come up to you in class and talk about how they start seeing the world differently, because you were talking about the 7 Ps or all the things, and how they when they then go out after class, how they start looking for, are the chairs comfortable, and all kinds of things that are part of the service.
Makes them more critical. They also tell me that too. You've made me more critical.
It does that too. Great question, Sterling. Sterling, actually, thank you for the question. Sterling is very much actually today, in a few hours I guess, representing the Center for Services Leadership at a practitioner conference in Utah. So thank you, Sterling, for dialing in and for that question. And it's a great lead-in for my next thought here, which is thinking about the textbook that you've written with Valerie Zeitamel at the start, and Dwayne Gremlin joined the author team later as well. And so that textbook is certainly one reason why your name is very well known to a lot of practitioners around the world, because that is the leading textbook in services marketing and has been for 25 years or so. So the question I have is also kind of thinking back to that moment. Writing textbooks isn't necessarily something that all academics end up doing.
Right.
So especially at that time, you had been at ASU a while, but you were still a young faculty member. How did you decide, hey, I'm going to write a textbook?
Right. Well, that's another good story. It has been an incredibly gratifying experience. First, let me just say that all three of us, Dwayne, Valerie, and I, are really proud of the investment we've made and in the book's impact. So it's been a wonderfully gratifying experience. The timing was right, though. At the point I did that, I was post-tenure. I had just gotten tenure, and I would not recommend anyone write a textbook before they have tenure, because it does take a lot of time, and it can send you on a path maybe that takes you away from other things that you need to focus on. The story of how we actually started it is interesting. Valerie had proposed to McGraw-Hill a textbook in services marketing. She'd put it in a proposal to do a textbook, and I was asked to review the proposal. So I was given the proposal to review and to say whether I thought it was a good idea or I thought the proposal held water, and so to speak. Well, I knew Valerie at the time, but I don't think I was aware this was her proposal, although I might have thought maybe, because it was blind. But after I did the review, I mentioned to the McGraw-Hill editor, I said, if the author of this book would be interested in a co-author, I might be interested in talking to them. Because like I said, for me, the timing was good. I was post-tenure. I had some flexibility. And I'd been teaching services marketing for several years at that point, and knew that we needed to put a lot of this stuff together into a more solid form. Well, the next thing I knew, Valerie was calling me, and she said, "Mary Jo, was that you on the review?" And I said, "Yeah, that was me." And she said, "Let's do it. Let's do it. I want you to work with me." So we did, and we got started. And at the time, there were no full textbooks on services. Chris Lovelock had a nice book with some text, readings, and cases, but it was pretty minimal on the text, and there were no fully developed textbooks. So we basically had a blank page. We basically had a clean slate. And now that was exciting, and it was also intimidating to have a blank piece of paper in front of us. Of course, we had the great proposal that Valerie had written. It was summer when we started the working on the book, and Valerie came out to Phoenix to work with me on it. We thought we'd get started face to face. We had a famous story of the two of us working in a pool on the book. We were standing on the side of the pool and writing notes on the pool deck.
Well, that's the way to do it, right? So
right.
For everybody out there, if you want to write a textbook, that's the right way.
And so that's how we got started. And I remember in those days, drafting papers or books was a very different experience. We didn't actually even have email. We weren't sending things via email. We weren't editing online. We didn't have, our text programs and software that allowed us to edit online and just send things to each other. so much has changed in the editing, writing, publishing aspect of books and articles since that time. But then we were doing a lot of things by hand, typing, sending things via FedEx. I mean, it was a whole different thing. The book is now, and we added Dwayne to the author group, Dwayne Gremler, on the fourth edition. The book is now in its 7th edition. And so we're looking at what we're going to do next. It's been translated into many different languages, Spanish and Portuguese and Chinese and Korean, I think, maybe some others. So it's been a wonderful process. And again, the timing was right. I don't think I would be interested in doing a textbook if there were already 6 or 8 textbooks in an area. But when there weren't any and we could really have that kind of impact, it was exciting. It was a good thing. Fun thing.
Great impact, but you start with, as you said, an empty piece of paper and
right.
figuring out what should go on this piece of paper. So really exciting, and I'll keep that in mind. If I ever want to write a textbook, I'll go find a nice pool and hang out there.
You give that a try.
It's certainly you certainly can't find a better start than that, or a better model than that to try and write a textbook. Let's go to another audience question. Crystal, please go ahead.
Mike Brady would like to ask the question, with so many of the visionary service scholars like yourself, quotations, retiring from teaching, not necessarily fully retiring, what are your thoughts and suggestions for cultivating new service scholars, especially in North America, where I feel there is a particular need for fresh faces?
That is a really important, very important question.
And I'm going to ask Mike to send $1. We have a jar in the office. If you use the R word for retiring, and I noticed, Mary Jo, you used that about 10 minutes ago. I made a mental note, so we'll have that $1 jar, and Mike can send us a $1 bill as well. So we're using Emeritus whenever we need to talk about it, and not the R word. But please go ahead.
Okay. It is really important to look at how we can bring new scholars into the services field. I think a lot of it depends on us as senior scholars to really inspire and bring people into our conferences, work with our own doctoral students, work with doctoral students who maybe aren't already knowing their services students, but bringing them into the area. I think there's a lot of scholars out there in the business world who don't necessarily see themselves as service scholars, but who are or who could be. So I think we need to cultivate a lot of the existing talent that's out there. I think part of it in the marketing field is that we have become somewhat, we have 2 kind of areas within marketing almost now. We have the modeling folks and we have the CV folks. And the managerial and services has kind of gotten squeezed a little bit. I see evidence that that's changing, and I'll talk a little bit later about something I'm involved in that I think is going to help change that across our disciplines and hopefully in marketing. But no question, there's still a great need. There's still room, and there's no question there's room for great research and services and important research that solves big problems. So I hope we can inspire our young people to see that and give them the space to do that kind of research.
Right at the entrance of the funnel, getting people to do a PhD in services.
Exactly.
And for all the faculty members out there, if you see a promising undergraduate or graduate student that might be interested in doing that, send them our way and have them apply at ASU, and we'd love to have them here.
And Mike would say, or at FSU.
Or at FSU for Mike, absolutely.
And many other good places, I'm sure.
That is true.
But anyway, it's we can identify those, and that's a really good point, Thomas. I think we've started thinking about that at ASU quite a bit, identifying those people in our MBA programs, in our undergrad programs, who we might be able to nurture along even earlier on.
Yes, that's great point, and it leads to the next question area a little bit. We've talked through the questions and as we moved along about the services field and so the understanding, and we started off the conversation with what it was like in the late 70s when there wasn't much. In 1993, you mentioned the article already. You wrote an article with Ray Fisk and Steve Brown, and there was a companion article with Len Berry and Parsu Parasumerman as well about the services field and how it got started. So it's a great article in the Journal of Retailing, and if you haven't seen that article yet, either on the practitioner side or the academic side, I recommend that you go and look it up on Journal of Retailing 93. Two-part question in a sense. So you wrote that article. Now, looking back with a little bit more hindsight on those first years from the late 70s to 93, what looks maybe different with an additional 25 years of hindsight on that, on how that started?
Well, a lot looks different. I mean, just so it's almost impossible to. I could talk about this for a long time. Not only in terms of the content of the topics and things that we're looking at, and the types of people involved and the companies involved in this field, and the literature that's just exploded, but also just how we do things and how we deliver knowledge and how we create knowledge and how we publish knowledge. It's a lot has changed. We have an expanded view, certainly, of what service means from what we thought of at that time. And the kinds of industries that it encompasses. In those early days, we were really thinking of service in a more narrow definition. And I think we've seen a huge impact on business in terms of the importance of service and using service as a strategic advantage as well. Service has become almost mainstream in the marketing discipline. Service logic is, in a sense, just a way of thinking about business that has been adopted by many in academics and in business. So big explosion, lots of things that are developed that we wouldn't have necessarily predicted at the time. When you asked me, I think what had surprised me about how the field did or didn't develop since that time, and it's been a long time, since 1993. I was not surprised that the field continued to develop rapidly. There were just so many people involved. There was so much interest. The business community was really charged up about service. I knew that we would continue, or we could continue to grow, and we did. In fact, many things that started as services marketing and relationship marketing concepts have now, as I mentioned, become mainstream marketing ideas. Things like service encounters and customer and employee interaction, service scapes, customer experience. All of these things that kind of started in the early days of service have now become really mainstream. In terms of disciplines, there's been a continued growth in the marketing and operations field in particular. I think I was a little bit disappointed maybe that we haven't had as much true interdisciplinary work across disciplines as I would have hoped, and I still hope that we do in the future. The global interest that we all could see way back then has continued and even exploded way beyond anybody's imagination. I think now the work in services is as much outside the U.S. as it is inside the U.S. for sure, and beyond Europe too, into Asia, China, Japan, India, Australia, New Zealand, China. I mentioned China already, but the South.
You've taught in China.
I've taught in China. I taught in China for about 7 or 8 years every year, and there they continue to have tremendous interest in services. Probably one of the biggest surprises to me, because I wasn't expecting it and I wasn't involved in it before it got published, was the 2004 Journal of Marketing article by Steve Vargo and the late Bob Lush. That article on service dominant logic. That, I think, that's a big surprise to me that came out at the time and that it's had the impact that it has had across disciplines, really. And I remember finding it again in my mailbox. I still was getting the physical copy of JM at the time, and seeing that article and picking it up and looking at that lead article and running down the hall with it in my hands to Amy Ostrom's office and saying, Amy, look at this, this is going to really change things. This is going to really have an impact. And we were both excited about it and been excited to see the major influence that it has had. Although I know we could have many discussions about all of that, I think it's had a big impact in many different ways.
That's great. Yeah, that was so you wove into it. So the second part that I would have had about this question, the surprises. So thank you for telling us some of those surprises as well. And we'll go to our next audience question. Crystal, please go ahead.
So I apologize if I don't say your name correctly, but Tunanen is wondering, how does the future of service look like when digital and physical worlds merge together with the Internet of Things, sensors, AI, like with Amazon Go stores, etc.?
Thanks, Tori. Thanks for that question. And it happens to go very well with the next question that Thomas was going to ask me, sort of the role and how all of this has changed over time with the influence of digital and online services. The question you've asked her is a really big question, and I think a little difficult for me to answer just on the spot. But we've seen huge changes, and we will see continued changes in the world of AI and other methods of delivering service or customers interacting with each other. All of this is something we need to, as service scholars, integrate into how we teach, as well as, it offers opportunities for some really forward-thinking research as well.
That's great. That was actually where we wanted to go. The whole notion of service and technology. So, Tura, thank you very much for that question. Right on time there. Let's look at your where you're going a little bit. Switching gears a little bit. You are now again emeritus. Not retired, emeritus. We very much are wanted to stress that. But emeritus, but still very involved in the center and in the field. And one thing that you have started to work on very intensively for a year or two now is this whole new area of RRBM, Responsible Research in Business and Management. Very fascinating, and I'm going to let you explain what that is and where that's going and how you get involved.
Okay. Well, I've only been an emeritus faculty, not a R-word faculty, but an emeritus word faculty since January, and just over 4 months. So I'm still kind of learning what that's all about. And before I talk about RRBM, just want to say that being an emeritus faculty, for those of you who out there who are about to become one, I know there's several of you, and who will at some point, it's a really neat and lovely title, actually, and it's something that we get to do in the academic world that they don't get to do in the business world typically. It's very different from, and I can use retiring here, very different from retiring from an industry job where typically you're done, you turn in your keys, and you leave. At ASU and at other schools, you actually can continue to be involved in this, and the university wants you to be involved, and they want you to stay engaged. At ASU, you even get a free parking place. So they encourage you to actually come to campus, but you can do these things at a pace and at a time frame and in an amount that is what you really want to do. So one initiative, as Thomas mentioned, that I've been involved in for the last 3 or 4 years is something called Responsible Research for Business and Management. And this is something I will continue to be involved in over the years, and I get more involved all the time. This is the goal of this group, and it's a grassroots kind of initiative that started here in the U.S., but it also goes across into Europe and other continents. Is the goal of this group, which includes deans and journal editors and senior scholars and association leaders from across business disciplines, so not just a marketing initiative, is to see business school research. The goal is to have business school research evolve in a way that it will have greater impact, it will solve societal problems, and it will be more relevant to the needs of the business world as well as society at large. And we know, as we evolve our research, we know there are barriers to doing that kind of research, whether it's tenure and promotion criteria, whether it's just the directions of our journals, whether it's all kinds of things that put barriers in the way of doing that really highly impactful, highly relevant work. So this group exists to push that forward. It's a group you can actually join and endorse if you like. The website is called rrbm.network. So it's rrbm.network. There's many concrete activities already happening. We published a white paper that you can endorse if you agree with the principles, and you go on the website to do that. There's many special issues of journals across disciplines again coming out that will endorse those principles and really try to publish the kind of research that does that. Journal of Marketing, for example, has a special issue. The call is, I think January or June 1st is the deadline. The issue is called Better Marketing for a Better World. And so they're encouraging these types of papers and publications. There's awards going on in different disciplines for RRBM consistent research. We will probably have one in marketing. There's one in management. There's one in operations already. There's a big summit, a by invitation summit this summer at Erasmus University. So I just encourage you to check out the website for this initiative. It's something that's really become important to me and that I'm planning to stay engaged in. I think we in services, let me just add, really fit the RRBM goals and vision. We've always done problem-based research. We've always been global. We've always tried to be interdisciplinary. So I think that it's a really good fit with the way our discipline has operated through the years. So professionally, I will very much stay involved with RRBM, and I'd be happy to talk to any of you about that. I'll also stay on the board of the CSL and in its faculty network, so I'll see all of you there at the board meetings and in the network. I'm going to serve on the advisory board at the University of Groningen, which I'm very excited about, and on the advisory board, of course, of the Journal of Service Research. And Val and Dwayne and I are working on the next iteration of our textbook. We aren't sure what that's going to look like or when, but we're working on that. And so personally, I have a lot of time to focus on just a few things, but do them the way I want to at the pace I want. Lastly, I would just say, many of you know my husband, Rich. We've been married, would you believe, 47 years.
Wow.
We've been married 47 years, and we have 2 daughters, 2 sons-in-law, and 6 grandchildren so far. So I love having time to just spend time with them and all of them. Going to baseball games and things like that. So we'll be doing more of that and traveling and that sort of thing.
That all sounds wonderful, and we at the center and the field, of course, are always hoping that some of your time, or as much of your time as we can get, will be helping the field and the center move forward as well. We appreciate
Definitely.
it, and thank you for that. Now the next section I want to talk about is I call it the Three Ifs, and so for our series that we are doing here with regards to going the future, just sort of a little sneak peek. So we're going to continue our discussion, our conversation with other folks from both business and academia as well. And at the end or near the end of each of them, I want to come to 3 ifs. And the first one of those is if I could relive something from my career, it would be.
I could relive something.
Relive something that you went through and you say, man, I'd like to do that again or experience that again.
You know, Thomas, I really thought hard about this question because he gave me these if questions in advance, so I didn't have to just make it up on the spot. Honestly, and this is just an interesting way I came to think about it, I wouldn't relive anything. I wouldn't regret anything at all, but I wouldn't relive anything, even though there were many wonderful times with students, travel, faculty, programs, initiatives in the center and at WP Carey. But I'm really not a person who wants to look back. I discovered that in thinking about this question. To either change anything or relive it. I'm always optimistic about the future, and I continue to be now. I enjoy anticipating the future and thinking about what it's going to look like. And I like to live in where I am currently and kind of let things shape where I go. So I wouldn't relive anything, although I would look back and know there were many, many wonderful times and experiences that I've been fortunate, to be at the right place at the right time.
I would have liked to be a little mouse when you and Mike Hutt were discussing whether to use the term service scape. That would have been a fun conversation to see. You in that already somewhat answered the next if, and the next if would have been, if I could change something from my career, it would be. But you kind of hinted that maybe.
I do have one thing I was going to mention, because I did think about this too, and this is a very specific thing. But I would try to figure out a way to include my family, in particular my children, in more of the really cool experiences I was able to have, whether it's travel or other things, mostly the travel, I think. I was in a dual career family. My husband's a lawyer, so he doesn't move around a lot. He doesn't get to pick up and go places too easily. Now he can. He is really retired, so he can. Our children had very busy lives with sports and other activities, so it would be challenging to pick them up and take them places. But I wish I could have tried harder to do that. Time flies, and now my daughters are 29 and 34, raising their own families, both married. But it seems like just yesterday they were little. And one bit of advice I would give to those of you with families, and I know many of you have done this and are good at it, is take advantage of the things that our wonderful careers offer us. I mean, we have the opportunity to engage with people all over the world, to travel, to go to conferences, to have that professional engagement. So I would say try to figure out a way to bring your kids along at some point. And I would say also, if you need advice on how to do this, well, just go talk to Dwayne Gremler, because he's the big expert. He's done it so well. And I think it's an important thing to try to do. And I would change that. I would change that.
Well, that's a great word of advice. And my final if, the third if, and this is relating to either the academic arena or the business arena or anything else you can come up with. But if I had a magic wand, I would.
Okay. Well, I'm going to keep it to my field and what I do. I would see a future. This would be the future I would see if I had a magic wand. I would see a future where service research is truly a cross-disciplinary field, where people are working in teams across disciplines. They're working on big projects and big problems. They're working with companies and organizations to improve and make the world a better place. I think I'd really love to see that. And service innovation, I think, can be at the heart of making the world a better place. Lots of service innovation that needs to happen, and I would love to see that going on across the academic and business worlds. I would love to see every company focused on making strategic decisions, not only on how to increase the bottom line, but also how to benefit customers and employees through better and more innovative services. And I think you can do all of that. It's not easy, but that's the world I would see if I could just wave a magic wand and create a future.
Well, that's a nice world to think about. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us on our inaugural conversation with, and I could not have asked for a better person to have on this first edition of that. And for all of you out there, thank you for joining us on this broadcast. We have a recording that will go up, so if there was any problems you had throughout, you can go back, or if you'd like to listen again to the wonderful stories and the wonderful experiences that Mary Jo has shared with us, you can do that. We'll post that on our website, and we'll send you by email the link to that as well. So thank you, everybody. If you're anywhere in the world, really, listening to us right now, and thank you, Mary Jo, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.